This is Dr. Jianing Chen from BNU HKBU USC. Again, welcome to my course of Studies of Contemporary Chinese Linguistics. This is Chapter 9 about sociolinguistics of contemporary Chinese. Okay, here's the outline of this chapter. I'm going to talk about the definitions and differences among semantics, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, and linguistic anthropology, and also dialectology. I'll then talk about code switching and plural linguism. And then I'll give some examples with analysis of Chinese language and gender. I'll mention gender code and femininity and masculinity labels of Chinese language. And finally, I'll try to analyze and summarize the causes of gender difference. Okay, first, let's talk about semantics. Actually, we already mentioned some aspects of semantics in the previous chapters. It is a study of meaning at levels of words, phrases, sentences, or larger units of discourse. And it includes lexical semantics and compositional semantics. The former term refers to the nature of meaning of words. The latter, while, refers to how smaller parts combine and interact to form the meaning of larger expressions, such as sentences. It studies context and its role on interpretation, opaque or unclear context, ambiguity, vagueness, entailment or implication, and presupposition. While pragmatics is a study of how context contributes to meaning. So it is the field of study evaluation how human language is utilized in social interactions and the relationship between the interpreter and the interpreted. It encompasses phenomena including implicature, speech act, relevance, conversation, and even nonverbal communication. The theories of pragmatics goes with theories of semantics and syntax. So there are three aspects, three levels interrelated with each other. Okay, here's the main topic of this chapter, the sociolinguistics. As we can see, it is much related with the above concepts. The sociolinguistics itself is the descriptive study of the effect of any aspects of society, including cultural norms, expectation, context, on the way language is used, and society's effect on language. It is overlapped with the pragmatics, sociology of language, while focused on the effect of language on society, and is related to linguistic anthropology. So what is linguistic anthropology? It is the interdisciplinary study of how language influences social life. It is a branch of anthropology that originated from the endeavor to document endangered language, encompasses most aspects of language structure and use, and explores how language shapes communication, forms social identity and group membership, organizes large-scale cultural beliefs and ideologies, and develops a common cultural representation of nature and social words. Okay, it is interrelated with anthropology. It studies how language varieties differ between groups separated by social variables, for example, ethnicity, religion, status, gender, level of education, age, and so on, and or geographical barriers. Later usually refers to the regional dialects. For example, you can consider the standard, so-called standard Chinese, which used in mainland China and Taiwan. They are different. And it also examines how such differences in usage and differences in beliefs and usage produce and reflect social and socio-economic classes. So the range of the study includes how social attitude determine what is considered appropriate or inappropriate language used in a particular setting, in context. It includes the study of grammar, phonetics, vocabulary, and other aspects of various social acts, the variety of social dialects. So it studies language on a national level among large population and also find out how language is used as a social institution. So the study methods of social linguistics include social acts. It studies social acts, and language usage varies among humans from different speech communities. Its studies typically take a sample population and interview them, assessing the realization of certain social linguistic variables. Also use other observations or studies related to dialects and speaking. Since the language usage varies from place to place, dialectology studies these dialects, and it is also sometimes called geographical dialectology, which studies variations in language based on geographic distribution and their associated features. It is kind of a subdiscipline of social linguistics, which concern with the phonological and grammatical features that corresponded to regional areas. So they study regional dialects. It is a commonly studied source of variations. Another very useful term is speech community. As we mentioned before, it is a distinct group of people who use language in a unique and mutually accepted way among themselves. They are to be considered as a part of a speech community. One must have a communicative competence, ability to speak, to communicate with others. The speaker has the ability to use language in a way that is appropriate in a given situation. And it is possible for speakers to be communicatively competent in more than one language variety or dialects. When you use more than one language or dialects, it is something related to code switching. It is the act of using multiple languages together. It is also called language alternation, referring to a speaker alternates between two or more languages or varieties in the context of a single conversation or situation. The use of more than one linguistic variety in a manner constituted with the syntax and phonology of each variety. And this ability is called plurilingualism. It's the ability of a person who has competence in more than one language to switch between multiple languages depending on the situation for ease of communication in order to communicate more effectively. It is connected to the situation where multiple languages exist side by side in a society but are utilized separately. For example, in my college, the UIC, our colleagues often communicate with each other using different languages simultaneously. This is called plurilingualism. For example, to communicate in English, sometimes Mandarin or Cantonese together. We need to distinguish high and low precipitate varieties of language or dialects. So the prestige refers to certain speech habits are assigned a positive or negative value, which is then applied to the speaker. It is realized on many levels. For example, at the individual level of sound or phoneme, you can hear someone's voice and make judgment of the prestige of the person because of the sound or pronunciation, or on the macro scale of language choice, to use or speak in a particular language sometimes reflect the social situation, whether consciously or subconsciously. I have a very interesting observation when I was visiting in the United States. Some young students speak English very well, although they are from China originally. So it is not very easy to distinguish the students from China and the students born in the United States. Both of them speak English very well, but in some occasions, for example, in some emergency situations, they use interjections differently. Those ABCs usually says, oops, when they express their surprise, while students from China recently sometimes say, 我操. So the habit of the language usage is something related to the social network. This is the tool that we understand language in a society. It means one also has to understand the social networks in which language is embedded. It is a way of describing a particular speech community in terms of relations between individual members in a community. It could be loose or tight depending on how members interact with each other. So a particular place where people communicate with each other can be regarded as a social network. So you can think, for example, in an office, colleagues can build up a social network for communication. And similarly, dormitory, you can consider whether they are tight communities or not. And let's talk about the differences according social class. Sociolinguistics was a pioneer through the study of language variations in urban areas, especially, focusing on the social variations. For the non-urban area, particularly the study of those linguistics are called anthropological linguistics. So it is important linguistic markers, including the class, occupation, for the people living in cities. For example, members of the working class tend to speak less standard language, using more local dialects, while members from middle class speak closer to the standard language. Interestingly, some of the upper class might often speak less standard than the middle. So if you change the way you speak, it is more often because of the social aspiration. It is the way to show your social identity. For example, one may speak differently or cover up an undesirable accent to appear to have a different social status and fit in better with either those around them or how they wish to be perceived. So social aspiration influences speech patterns. Because they are wishing to be associated with a certain class, usually the upper or upper middle class, people who are moving in the direction socioeconomically may adjust their speech patterns to sound like them, to pretend to be a member of the middle class or higher middle class. Because they are not native upper class speakers, they often hypercorrect, meaning to overcorrecting their speech to the point of introduce new errors. For example, I sometimes attend a wedding ceremony. I observe many Tianjin native parents who has usually never chances to speak in public. They deliver formal speech at weddings in a broken Mandarin, very funny standard Chinese, whether Tianjinese expressions or accent. And there are also opposite situations. For example, individuals moving down in social economic status linguistically. I'll give you an example of myself. Sometimes I use Tianjinese expressions with a Tianjin accent when I take a taxi. I speak to a taxi driver using Tianjin accent, pretend to be closer to him or her. So let's talk about sociolinguistic variations. The study of language variation is something related to social constraints determining language in its context to environment. The variations will determine some aspects of language, including sound, grammar, tones, or even nonverbal cues, gestures, or postures. And different types of age-based variation matters, including the age range, indications of linguistic change in the process, the linguistic change across time. Buzzword and slangs for some examples. Buzzword is a kind of word or phrase that becomes popular for a particular period of time. So buzzword can become popular and then unpopular. So slang is an informal vocabulary common in everyday conversation, but avoided in formal writing. So sometimes you can use this word in oral language, but you do not know how to write it. Slang. And the use of slang can be a variation based on age. For example, younger people tend to recognize and use today's slang, always change buzzwords as their slangs, while older generations may not recognize new slang. They could be out of date of the slang, but they might use slang from when they were younger. For example, I sometimes still use 不感冒 to express the meaning of I'm not interested in, while 潜水 to imply that to keep silent, to pretend not online, which were the old usage, more than 20 years ago even. A younger generation might not understand the meaning of that because they are old slangs for my generation. So this way we can analyze the variation in language. So the variation can come from ethnicity, economic status, and level of education, or different genders. They have different criteria to analyze. And this way, the artisanant is different from vernacular language. Artisanant is sometimes in Chinese we call it 官腔, very formal, the expression very formal, while the vernacular refers to the common words we use in daily life, 大白话. This pair is the difference of the sociolinguistics, social acts. You can consider, and compare this pair to another pair, 官话 and 方言, Mandarin and other dialects.